Alright, welcome to day 17 on Launch Code and Create. Today we are going to start manipulating our DOM element or simply we are going to start manipulating our HTML elements. Before we begin, I would like us to look at something. When we started using CSS on our HTML, we learned that our CSS sees our HTML differently. So I have this drawing here with CSS with its eye looking at our HTML document. So we said that HTML, CSS then, what it saw or what it sees is a set of blocks. So let me use different color. So for CSS, every element on our page is a block, and that block can be a large block that covers the whole page, like in the case of this header here, this heading tag, this paragraph tag, and also boxing. And then there's this button here, which is actually a short box, and we also have these terms here, which is a short box, this one here. So we qualify these elements of either inline elements or block elements. So the block elements are those ones with the large shapes that cover the whole page, and we call that the box model. So that's to CSS. That's how CSS was perceiving the HTML element. Now that we are going to combine HTML with JavaScript, we also need to look at how JavaScript sees the HTML element. And JavaScript is kind of strange. You see, you can see that it has two retinas, so it can see quite strangely. And so to JavaScript, what it does is it does not see the shapes as such. What it only sees is just the first opening tags. So for the HTML, for example, it sees the opening HTML tag, as simple as that. Then when it sees it, it will just look at it under it, what other tags exist under it. So in our case here, for example, it has the body tag that exists. Before the body tag set, we have the head tag. So it sees the head tag, but it doesn't consider the closing head tag. And then under the head tag, what does it see again? Then it will go and see the title tag. And then under the title tag, what does it see? It sees what we call the text tag. And there's no other element that comes under the text tag. So it will mark it as a hash, which is like the end of this tree of this descending road. So, and then at the same level at the header, once he has gone throughout the header to its deepest, then it will come back and check after header. What do we see? We see the body tag. So it will check the body tag. Then under the body tag, what do we have? In our context here, we have a tag called heading 1. So it will pick the heading 1 and check if under heading 1 we have something else. Yes, we have something, but that's basically plain text. So after this plain text, there's nothing else. It stops there. Then at the same level at the heading 1, do we have another thing? Yes, we have a paragraph. So which is this paragraph, which is I am the tech guru. And then under the paragraph, do we have something else? Yes, we have a text. So you see, that's how JavaScript keeps on exploring all the tags from the beginning to the end. And all this, it will build what we call a tree. So if you were to imagine it as a tree, you could see that HTML comes with HTML as the top. So far, based on the tree we have here, HTML, and under it we have the head. And the head at the same level, we have the body tag. So we have the body tag, and then under the head we have the title. We might have many other elements, the same thing. And under the body here we have the h1 tag, and then we also have the p tag. So we could have many at the same level, and then so on. It can continue to draw like this. So this becomes a big tree. So for JavaScript, the only thing it sees of our HTML is just a giant tree of tags linked to each other, and based on their dependence on how we nested them. So this is the thing that we call the document object model. So for JavaScript, it only sees this document object model. So your HTML document is actually modeled. Remember, we spoke of modeling ideas. So it's modeled as a tree. So if it is modeled as tree, This allows JavaScript to be able to manipulate every single part of this tree. So every part of the tree as this is called what we call a node. So this is another node, right? So JavaScript has the capacity to affect these nodes either by cutting them off, by changing them, or by moving them to a different location and so on. This is what allows JavaScript to easily manipulate HTML. So in this lesson, we are going to look at how to manipulate these HTML elements in the first place, and secondly, we'll see how we can also use JavaScript to manipulate CSS and all together. So let's begin and go ahead and start that. So I have my project created inside my folder day 17. So I have two files created. One is index, one is nice. So the index is where we use to try to explore everything we want. So in this index file, I have my head, which contains the title with some metadata, and then I have my body, which has a main. So you can imagine the tree already. So you have body, under body you have main, and under the main you have heading 1, heading 2, paragraph, and then the text, and then a button here. So let's look at what we can do with this. So when it comes to manipulating HTML elements or manipulating the DOM, there are certain common actions we can take to actually appreciate the whole activity. So some of these things are, for example, finding the element, right? And this finding is not only to HTML. If you do recall, when we were doing CSS, the first thing we needed to do with CSS is to be able to target elements. So over there in the CSS world, we called it targets, because you need to find out what HTML tag you are dealing with before you can do anything. So the same thing applies with JavaScript. So we need to be able to find the tags we are working with, or the tag we want to do something with. So finding is very important. So another thing we could do with the elements is that we can add new. So we can add elements to the existing document object model or to the existing HTML tags we have. We can also remove them. See, we can remove them. We can also read their content, which is if there's a heading 1 which has some text inside, can we pick only this text? And then we can also modify their behavior through the attributes. So modify. So we can also modify their behavior through their attributes and so on. So these are the things we are going to try to explore through this exercise here. So we'll try to go through each one of these possibilities and see how we can achieve that using JavaScript. So we'll head over to our HTML document, go right before our body tag, the closing body tag, and then we'll use the embedded JavaScript. Remember the ways of combining HTML and JavaScript. We can inline, we can embed, and we can also use external JavaScript. So in this case, we'll keep it embedded so that we don't separate the two and get actually distracted. So here we go. What do we do in the first place? Before we even move forward, I would like to show you something. So I'm going into my document, the 17, and open the index file, and we see the content we have here. So remember, I told you about the console element over here. So there's something, sometimes we would like to know if something happens. For example, when I use the function alert and I say, okay, to prove that indeed our code is running perfectly, we usually do that. So if I do this, you can see it pops up. Okay, that is what shows that my JavaScript setup is actually working properly. But there is an issue with this function alert, which is it always blocks the document from loading until I click OK. So this can be really difficult to manage as you program, because you have to reload your page several times. So to avoid that, we can actually tell JavaScript to actually talk to the engine, and then the engine should actually redirect its responses to the console on the browser. So we use the function console, and then we say log everything or whatever we want on the console. So we could say ready. So if the JavaScript we just wrote is working fine and it goes to the JavaScript engine in the browser, and the engine reads it, the engine should spill out ready, and it should spit it out on the console. So that's what this means. So if I refresh, so you see we don't have a pop-up, but rather we have a message that says ready here. So this can be very handy and useful to us throughout our process. One, to check sometimes if a certain variable we are trying to access exists, or what exactly is inside that variable. We want to know to be sure that we are using it at the right place and for the right reasons. So let's go ahead and now move on to our actual goal, which is to explore the possibilities. So the first one we want to check is the finding. How do we find, or do we search, or how do we select HTML elements through JavaScript? So there are quite many ways to do that. JavaScript in its early days had functions proper to every single action we want to do. For example, if we in CSS we used to have the element, we target the HTML element like this, and then we make the curly bracket to say that we are targeting the heading ones. So in JavaScript we also have that option, which is you do the document dot get elements by tag name. So you see, by doing that, we are saying, okay, get all the elements with the tag name we would specify here, in this case, heading 1. So that will actually go and fetch all the heading ones. So you can see here, the elements here is plural. So it means all the heading ones that exist on the page will be fetched. Now remember, this is a value it will return, and this value will be in the memory. So we learned that when we want to reference values in the memory so that we can be working with them, manipulating them, and indicate that we want to do something to these values, so we actually link them to variables. So we can declare a variable which we call let, and we'll call it, let's say, heading, because we know it is containing heading. So we are going to assign the value of this operation, this expression, into, we are going to link it or reference it by the name heading. So by doing so, heading will contain all possible headings. So we could even make it plural. So this is going to bring headings. So to even give a test to our console log, let me try it here and see what do we even get by doing that. Console log. So if I do console log headings and go back to my page, reload it, I should see that indeed it brings me a collection. It is a collection. So a collection is always a set of many elements. But in this case, since we have only one heading, we got only one element, which is a good thing. So it proves that our operation actually worked. So that's one way of getting elements in JavaScript. We also learned that we could have in CSS set tags, IDs to elements like this. So once we set the ID, we could do hash in JavaScript and CSS, and then write the CSS inside, which CSS will now be attacking this element that has the ID second. So we can also do the same thing in JavaScript, and JavaScript has a function called get element. So always use document. We'll come back on this word document. Document dot get element by ID. So look at how we use element here. It is not plural, because all elements that have an ID, whatever we specify here, in our case second, must be unique. So we don't expect to return many elements through this request or through this expression. So here too, since we have the expression, we should expect a return of value. So that value, we can actually reference it through a variable, and you might probably call that variable second element or second heading. So we can call it the second heading. So if we do console log of this second heading, what do we get? So if you refresh our page, we should see indeed it went to find the element. So in the console, the JavaScript engine spits it out for us to see. And once we mouse over on it, we can also see it highlighted on our document. So this is perfect and this is great. So we can access elements by the tag names. We can access element by the the IDs. So we can also, just like we access with the IDs, we can also access through the classes. So let's say we have a class on this paragraph. So probably if I add another paragraph, and then I also add some dummy text inside. Let me also reduce this dummy text. So I'll make it simple as this. So, and then I'll decide to give these paragraphs a class. So I'll group them into a class, which we'll call, let's say, parag. So parag for paragraphs. And then we decide to actually pinpoint or pick this paragraph. So we could say, so now I'm going to start with a variable name. So paragraphs is equals to document dot get elements by class name. So then we specify the class. And note here, we don't need to specify the dot like we do in CSS. We just specify the class name and we are good to go. So if we do now console.log of the paragraph to see if we're able to actually grab it, we can refresh, and yes, we got a collection because there are many paragraphs. So we have the first paragraph, the second paragraph, which is here. So this works very well. So we have these functions like this, which are specific to whatever we want to do, and urge you to go and look around this topic as well. But recently, another function was introduced to help us kind of make these whole operations with just one function, which is called the query selector. So we use query selector to pinpoint whatever we want, but the query selector takes in parameter CSS selectors. So very important to note that CSS selectors. So all possible selectors you know in CSS can be passed in here. So be it a tag name or an ID or a class, or if it's an ID, you can make it ID. If it is a class, you make it dot class, the class name, or if you are just selecting a property or an attribute, you can go ahead and select the attribute of type input. So you can actually write all the CSS selectors possible in here. So this kind of function query selector actually selects only one thing, which is the first thing it meets that actually respects or satisfies this condition of selection specified in each bracket. So if in our case, for example, if you want to achieve these same things we did here, the first one would be query selector heading 1, and then we'll actually put it in a variable and say QSH1. So query selector heading 1 equals to this. So if I echo or console log this, you should see that we have the heading 1 selected. So query selector is not defined. So the reason is because I did not specify that it is on the document. So document.query selector, and if I reload, you can see we got the heading 1. So if you want to achieve this same thing we did here, I'll just bring here second, and I will do hash because we are dealing with an ID, so I specify hash. So I will not change the name just for simplicity purposes, and then I'll go ahead, load, and you see we got the second. So if we do this, we get the paragraph, and I pass it here, paragraph, but here it is a class, so we put dot. So if I go and reload, what do we get? The first one, and this is where it becomes interesting. So we know that we have two paragraphs that have this class parag, but document.query selector actually picked the first paragraph. So instead of this to return a list of paragraphs like the way get elements by class name does, or get elements by tag name does, by bringing us a collection of all the elements that have that attribute or that name, but query selector rather returns the first one. So what do we do if you are using query selector to select a set of elements or a collection of elements that satisfy a condition? So in that case, we use, so let's say, or we call query selector or. So it means all the elements that satisfy this collection, return them. So, and this will return a collection. this will return a collection. So in our case, if we take this all now, we console log it, we are expecting it to bring us all the paragraphs. And you can now see we have a node list. So a node list is actually just like we said here. We have nodes and nodes, and so it will bring a list of nodes. It means a set of nodes. So that's what we have here. And we can access these nodes one by one by saying, for example, out of the all element, we want to pinpoint the first one. You can see here that they have their indices, which shows that this one, the first paragraph, is on position 0, the second paragraph is on position 1. So we'll see these elements in tomorrow's lesson, where we'll learn about arrays and objects. So we can access them and do whatever we want. So if I now console log only that one, you can see that we get the first paragraph. So this is a little bit about selecting. Like I said, there are more functions we can use. So in general, you will see us actually making use of these functions to select elements. So now let's move on to the next step. We are done with finding elements. We've seen how that is done, so we can take that out. So the next thing is, how do we add new elements in our document? So let's learn about that. So the first thing we do, there's this function. Before even I move on, let me explain why I use the word document here. So the idea is, I said here now that JavaScript sees our document in this format, or in this scheme. So and I said the HTML element is kind of the top. Yes, it is kind of the top, but remember, before the HTML element we have the document itself, which is the doc type and so on. So it means there's a bigger plus to the HTML. So let's assume this is the HTML. So out of the HTML, we also have the document type, so that deals with the whole document itself, right? And also, we should remember, outside this document, the document itself is also inside what we call the window. So this is how JavaScript sees all of them. So it considers the window first. So the window, not windows, but the window. And then after the window, it sees the document. So the document. Then after the document, now you have access to your HTML elements and so on. So JavaScript assumes that when this is seen as the super parent, this is seen as parent, and this is another parent, and they are children. So whenever you want to access a child, you say the parent name. So you see, just like the way you say your father's name, then your name. So you say parent, and then you put a dot to say, okay, after the parent, we are going to a child. So basically, that's what JavaScript is doing. That's how it is able to explore all these nodes in the DOM tree. So after parent, child, and then maybe child can have another child, and it might go on as such. So that's why we write this document. So it means, where I have document, I could have also said window.document, and it will still get the same result. So if we do that, and I do window.document, you see that when I reload my page, the same result we had will get here, or except window.document. I have a challenge here. Okay, yes, because I actually removed the console log, so I won't see much here. So if I decide to do console log, or I should see all my paragraph brought back to me. So basically, adding window document does not make any difference. So, but for just simplicity and clarity purpose, we can omit this one and then move on from the document side. If we don't use document, it won't make sense for us to access this function. And also, as time goes, we'll see that these are called properties of the object, or functions on the object. So you need to bring the object name, the highest parent name, and then the properties. So this is why we use this document and document here and over. So let's go back to our topic, which is now creating new tags. So to create tags, we use the function called create elements. So basically, let's say we set a variable that will contain the new element we want, and that element is going to be a div. It can be any HTML tag we want. So we use document again, and then inside the document we want to create element. So what element do we want to create? It can be a P, it can be a link, it can be a span, and anything you want. But in our case, we just want a div, so we do div. So once we created a div, we could probably make use of Console.log here. So let me even bring this Console.log, and then we say all inside, just for references purposes. So here I can bring in another Console.log and log the div and see if actually a div was created. So if I go and reload my document, you can see yes, the div is created, but that div does not exist in my document yet. Nothing is here. If you bring the page source and we look at the source, you will see that there is no such div around here. So but JavaScript has already created it, but it is not yet attached to the tree. So that's the thing. The div is created, but it has not been attached to the tree. That's because as soon as we attach it to a tree somewhere here, automatically it is going to reflect on the window or on the document right here. So how do we get it attached to the document? So to get it to attach it, so we'll say attach to DOM. To attach it to the DOM, we do the DOM element we want to attach it to. So what it means is are we going to attach it to the head element? Are we going to attach it to the H1 element or the P element or the body element? So we need to find the element that will hold it. So let's say we declare an element and say holder. The element that will hold the new tag we just created, or node holder holding node. Let's name it holding node. So what node is going to hold that new element we just created? So it means we also have to do some selection here. So we have to kind of select. So it means we kind of need to select that element, that holding node, right? Select holding node. So this is a comment, so it means it will be after the selection. We already learned how to do the selection. In our case here, we are going to use document query selector. So we'll get used to it since you already know what it does, and it's quite simplified compared to others. But maybe from time to time you might be called to use all these others from in some circumstances. So in our case, which element do we want to hold it? So let's start by using the body elements, because that is quite easy to understand because it's the largest element after all. So we'll take the body element as the holding element. So now once we get the holding element, we are going to say, so for the holding element, append a child. We could also, if you remember, I used a function yesterday which is inner HTML, inner text. We could try to do that. So the holding element inner text, and then we now say take the div. You see the strange thing that will happen. You see, JavaScript tells us you are actually trying to kind of insert an object which is of HTML div type inside in the body element, and that JavaScript does not like it because basically this thing contains some HTML, not text, not basic text, so that will not do. So we also have the inner HTML. Would that work? Inner HTML. So would that be able to work if we do that? No, still it doesn't work. So the best way, and besides, if we remember, if we do this, if I do this and I say this is some tag, let's say, let me use B tag, and then I write grade, and then I close the B, this would work. So you see the grade comes and the HTML is actually interpreted. So it doesn't take the div, it doesn't work with the div. So besides, even if it had worked, this is not the expected result we want. We don't want to clear the existing content and then put in this content or the content of the div element. So, and besides, what we are doing with the inner HTML, and inner this is to actually push in content inside a tag. So we don't actually append an element to a node. So we don't actually hang an element on the node. This is not hanging a node. So we are looking for a way of hanging a new node, not putting something inside a node. So that's the issue. So to hang something on the tree and as a new node, so we use append child. So to this holding node, we want to append another child. So this looks like this. So this looks like, okay, this is the holding node. So we want to append another child to it. We want to append another child to it. So that's basically what we are trying. But in our case, we targeted the body element, and then we want to append that new div we just created here. So that's what we are trying to do. We don't want to insert it in the content here, but we want to create a new div. So that being said, if we do that, we now replace it, append child. So it doesn't take equals to sign, but it takes a bracket. It's a function. And then we append the child we want to append, which is the div child we just created up there. So if I reload, we should see that the div would be appended. So far, we don't see anything, but the div is appended. So if we now check our document, let's even display the source code and see. So we do view source code. So we are not seeing it in the source code. It's normal. Remember, it's just temporal. So to see it very well, we inspect the object here, and this is how you can see, because we are actually pushing it in the tree. We are not pushing it in the HTML file we have in our folder. So it is not saved. It actually happens at the runtime. That's as the browser starts to read the document. That's when that happens. So it's not saved. Meanwhile, when you do view page source, you can see the browser actually goes right inside your drive and then fetches the file itself and displays whatever is in the file. So we can see that through the source file, but we can see it with only by expanding the DOM element, the DOM tree through the console here or the elements here. So, and this is the div. Now there's nothing in the div, that's why we are not seeing anything. And that will bring us to the next part of this topic. So we are done with adding. So the next thing is, how do we modify an existing element? So there are many ways of modifying an element. So we can modify the content, so by using our inner text and inner HTML. We can also modify the attributes and change their behavior. So attributes. So I hope this is now becoming cumbersome so far. So when it comes to the modification, we can do these modifications. So here we are going to focus on this one, and as we continue, we will see this possibility. So we are going to modify the content. We already have the div here, and we just want to modify its content. And like we said, to modify the content, we just bring the element and we call the function or the property inner text if you want, or inner HTML, and we say it's equals to whatever we want to set there. So in this case, this is a dynamic div added by JavaScript. So once we do that, at this point, the div we just created, after creating it, we'll console.log it just to see that it was created. Once we're done, if it exists, we can now insert some text in it. And once the text is inserted, we can go and find the node on which we are going to hang it. And once we get that node, we can go and hang it on top or append it. So it should now actually generate some content on our page, and this is the content. So you see, that's the beauty. And because we said append child, it will actually append it at the end of the document, the holding element. So in our case here, the holding element is the body tag. So if you decide to change the holding element to be, let's say, second here, what do we get? And second here is an ID. So I'm going to do hash ID. And what do we get? So you can see this is the second, and on inside that element, not only we have the existing text, but our div was also inserted inside, right? Our div was inserted inside. So it means we can decide to choose which node, on which node do we append that new element we just created. So that's a beautiful thing. So we'll return it back and keep it on our body. This is just for you to understand that these are possibilities. There's no limit to it. So we have seen this and how to read these elements. So it means there's one also option which is here. We actually inserted something inside. Is it possible that we can also read? So this is the option we want to know. So how do we find out if we can read content from another div? So let's assume our JavaScript here. We want to also create another element. So let me create another element here. So we are going to say div, and then I'll give it a class of fill. So I'll give it a class of fill, which means we want to fill this element with some content, but the content we want to pick from to fill in this element is going to be the welcome message, which is this one. So we are going to pick this message. We'll read this message from this element or this tag or this node, and then fill it in our empty tag that exists somewhere here. So the tag should be somewhere here. I didn't refresh. So where's the fill tag? Okay, it is here. So it's somewhere close after the paragraph. So let me cancel this and bring it. So God. So man, so this is it here. So we are going to fill it with the content of the heading. So how do we go about that? So we already got the heading element here. We already got it. So we can target that element by using, oh no, we set heading. So it means we have to kind of get it only the first heading. Okay, we have it. No, that's not good. So I guess I have to find it again. So we need to select that heading again. So we created tag here, modified tag content, and then we've actually attached a new element to a DOM. So what we want to do now is, so here we want to be able to read tag content, and then we want to fill another tag with it. So this is what we want to achieve. So read the tag content. So it means we have to get that tag first. So we say let container be. So that's the element that contains what we want. So it's the container of our content. So we are going to do document dot query selector. So that element is our heading here, and it doesn't have any particular class or ID, so we cannot get it specifically. So this means we can simply even use this one we have here, which is the headings, but that's the first heading. So we are going to say the first heading. That's the heading at the position 0. So there's no need for us to write all this all this again, because we already selected all the heading ones. So once we selected the heading one, we take the one at position 0, which is the first one. And after all, we only have one heading on the whole document. So the container now is going to be that heading. So let container container content is equals to container dot inner text. So that's how we fetch that text. So we want to fetch all the inner text of the container elements. So that's that heading one, and we put it in a variable called container content. So we have now the container content inside. So if you don't believe me, let's console.log it and you will see. So if by doing that, we should see that we fetch the container content, the console, and you can see it here. So once we have the container content, it is time for us to go and fill it in that element, which is the fill element. And that one too, it means we have to select it. So we select it by saying let fill target be equals to document.querySelector. By now you understand what is going on. It is a class, so we do this, and once we have it, we can go ahead now and say the field target dot inner text. So we use the same inner text, and now we give it value. So when we call inner text without value, it means we are actually trying to put to get the value, but if we assign a value to it, we are now trying to set its value. So this inner text, I'm using inner text here. It could be inner HTML or inner content. So these are the three possibilities you usually see. So if we refresh, you can see that text was fetched from the heading and now put here in this tag using JavaScript. And now our dynamic element was appended also. So we have seen all these possibilities. So there's also a way of we removing. How do we remove an element from the tree? So we'll try that. So in this case, we'll just find one of our elements and just remove it, or I will just add an element that has to be removed. So let me say to delete. Let me give it a class of to delete. And this one will say has to be deleted. So if we reload our document, we should see this tag with its content which says has to be deleted. So once we write the JavaScript to delete it, normally by reloading the page, it will just be vanished. We won't even see it. So it means to delete, so delete. So we have to first of all get it. So to delete, so we create a variable to delete or delete target. So let's call the variable delete target, and then we say document.querySelector, as you could see now, and then it is a class. We put a dot, we paste the name of the class of the element we are targeting. So once we have that, we could simply say delete target dot delete, as simple as that. And then we can refresh. So it says delete target delete is not a function. Sorry, we use remove, not delete. Great, so it vanishes. So basically, that's one good way of exploring this. With this exercise, you've been able to manipulate the DOM elements by adding, removing, updating, and so on. And you've learned how to select in various ways and so. So it is possible, it is now high time we tried our hands on something more interesting. So here I've prepared this exercise. So I'm going to clean all the JavaScript and then we'll start over again to show you one practical way of using this skill and do this. So I'll keep the CSS, but the JavaScript part will redo it. So let me go in our document and open that document, and this is it. So the game is simple. By default, the document has a white background. So I want us to be able to click on red and change the background of our document into red, blue, and then change it into blue and so on. And whenever we click on reset, it will bring the background to white. So let's go ahead and then open the document in our text editor, so which we already have here. So we go down here and we set our JavaScript section, and then we start writing our JavaScript. So as you might know, the first thing we need to do is to actually grab. So by doing the selection, so we need to do selection first, like we said here. So we select, we get the element, we go and pinpoint them. Then we are going to do something which is the next part of this work. As we mentioned earlier yesterday, the event. So we said DOM manipulation also includes events management. So we want to see that how do we deal with events, which is when there is a click, there's a mouse over, there's a key press and so on. What do we do? So we are going to look at that right now through this exercise. So we'll grab the elements one by one, and then we'll now listen to the click events on them. So when there's a click event, what do we do? And we can take some actions. And this is where it takes us to the next part of this exercise, as I said earlier on, for us to learn how to manipulate CSS using JavaScript. So first step, grab all targets. right? So our first target, let's say red. I think that's the name of the button, red. So we'll name it red, and we are going to use document dot query selector. So we use query selector. It has an ID, so we just use the hash and we bring the ID name, which is red. So once we have that, we can go ahead and replicate this same code 4 times, and all we have to do is change the name of the value which corresponds to the name of the ID, in our case blue here. We go ahead, we do the same thing for the second one, which is green, and then we do the last one, which is reset. So by doing this, we are now ready to take actions. So the first thing is to listen to event. Listen to event, specifically click event. So specifically click event. So how do we listen to events? We learned that we could do on click. So we could say on click. So what happens? So in this case, we could say on click alert. So we call a function alert, and in this case, this is a built-in function in JavaScript. So probably write red. So in our case, no matter the button, we are going to get a red. So if I click, you see it pops up red. So we can pass in a function to do that. So what if I change this function, right? If I change this function into, let's say, our own function, which is change background bg. So change bg. So if I refresh and click, oh, nothing happens. Let's inspect and see if the console there's an error there. Oh, reference change bg is not defined. So it means I'm trying to call a function that does not exist. So before we do it here, let's try to create that function. We learned how to create functions, so we are going to do function and we give it a name, and then it takes a parameter which is color, because you can see here we need to pass it the color. And then what should it do? It should just, in our case right now, we'll just console.log the color. So console.log the color the user passed. So if we refresh now, we click, we get red, we click, we get red, we click, we get red. But if I change back here now, put in the right colors, which is blue, so we keep it small letters, blue, green, and reset. So if we now look at it, we click, you see we get green, blue, red. So actually it means from this event listener, which is a property and an HTML property specific for JavaScript clicks or JavaScript click events. So we can actually pass it a function which can now be in charge of dealing with what we want to do, right? So this is one simple way of doing that. We could also decide like, okay, this looks a bit cumbersome and a bit dirty to do, because as time goes, this can become very difficult to manage. So we would not use the inline CSS, JavaScript, sorry. So we are going to rather, since we grabbed the various elements, we can now listen to the event in our JavaScript section using a special function called AddEventListener, because I also want you to know about that. So this is how we do it. We pick the element which is red, and then we do add event listener. So we have many listeners, so we have different types of events we can listen to, or this function can listen to. In our case, we want to listen to a click. It could be a mouse over. It could be a mouse over, or a mouse up, or a click, or a drag, or a scroll. It can be any event, or on a key press, and so on. So in our case, we are interested in just the click. So now once you say the click, you must pass in the function now that you want to execute once the click is done. So in our case, we want to actually call the change function. So let's try that and see how you'll be surprised. So we'll keep it with just red. We'll do it with red first. So let's reload our document and see nothing happens. So now let's click, and when we click, you can see something actually happened. So we console.log color. So it console logs nothing, pointer event, because when we do change this, when we do the click and then we call this function, what happens is the add event listener will take the click event that actually happened, which is basically a huge set of data. Like you could see, it's a bunch of data, and then it will pass it to this function as a parameter, although we did not set it here, but basically it passes the event here like this. So it will pass that event to the function change bg. But since our function change bg expects a parameter, it doesn't matter how we name that parameter. It could have been anything here. It doesn't matter. What matters is when the value we pass to the function when we are calling the function. So here we are calling the function by passing it. JavaScript actually passes the event to it. We didn't, because even though I removed it, it still passed that value. And even if we call it here A, you will see that it will still get the same bunch of information. So basically, JavaScript is forcing us to grab a parameter we don't want. So we need to deal with this matter. So in order to do that, we will pass in a function and a proxy function, a function that will be an intermediate to which JavaScript is going to call. So when JavaScript calls it, it will pass it that bunch of event data. And now we can decide inside that function to call our change background function. So basically, how do we do that? So it is called passing it an anonymous function. So you just write a function here. It doesn't have a name. That's why it is an anonymous function. So that function now will receive the event that the user just did, the click in our case, and then in the body of our function, we can do anything we want. So in our case, for example, let me console.log that event. So if we do that, you will see that indeed we get the same bunch of information. You see, so that was the event that was passed. Now we are proxied, we are protected by this function. So JavaScript will not force our function to receive that bunch of event data. So once we have that, we can now inside here decide to make a call to our function. So we can say change color, and then the color we are going to pass, in our case here it is red. So we pass the actual red to it, and if we do console.log, we should now see that indeed it is the red we are console.logging, and you can see the red here. So basically that is it, right? So and once we have that for the red, we can do the same thing for the other colors. So we'll just have to duplicate this. So we'll go ahead and say blue and put blue here. So blue, and then the next one is going to be green. So we've set it for all the various elements. Now for the reset, since the background is going to be white, so in the case of reset, we don't just pass a reset, but we are going to pass the color code, the color name white. So by doing that, you can see that we have abstracted a load from all these functions. If we had written the actual procedure through which we change the color everywhere here, it would have been cumbersome, and maintaining it would have been difficult. It means anytime we change that procedure of changing the background color of the document, we have to do it everywhere around here. But we abstracted, and that's what we call encapsulating. So JavaScript or functions in general allow us to encapsulate a function or a process into one thing, which we can reuse several occasions or in several places. So this is one good example of such thing. So now let's come back to the actual operation our function will do. So far it only console logs the color we just passed to it. So we want to do better, which is in our case change the background of the body or the document. So that's the body tag, or let's say the document. So in that case, in bracket body. It's the body tag we are going to target and change the background. So as you could see, the first thing we need to get to do is to fetch it or select it. Select body tag. So we already know how to go about that. So let body tag be equals to document dot query selector, and then we pass in the tag name, which is body. We don't need to do anything. And since we know that query selector only selects the first element, we are going to get our body tag. And after all, we don't have two body tags, so definitely we are going to get one element inside this. So once we have the element, this is where things start to become interesting. Now we want to be able to modify the CSS on that body tag. We want to apply some CSS. We want to do some CSS tricks. So how do we go about that? So with JavaScript, what you do is you call the element, then you do dot. So you access one particular parameter of that element, which is the star. So it's just like the way we have the star attribute. So we actually access that attribute here by doing dot star. So once we do dot star, we will also dot append whatever property we want to modify of that element. So we do dot, what do we want to modify? Let's say the color, for example. It is a property. So once we do that, we will now say equals to, what do we want to change as color? Let's say pink. So we are actually saying that find the body tag, set the attribute style to it, and that inside that attribute style, set the color property as CSS. And that color property, remember, the properties or attributes use the equals to sign to assign values to it. So we take that equals to sign, and then at the right side of it, we just put in the color we want as a string. Note that as a string. So if we reload, nothing happened. We got nothing as well. So this looks strange. So we have the body tag document.body, so style, color, then pink. Okay, yes. So nothing would happen, of course. Something will only happen if we click on any of our buttons. So if I go this, so you see, by clicking now, it changes our body text into pink. So in our case, we don't want to change the text color, but we want to change the background color. So we do background. And then remember in the CSS, we do background color. By doing that, JavaScript being a programming language, the minus is actually an operator. So it's not a union element. So we cannot use the minus. So JavaScript defined these rules and say rather replace the dashes by the camel case format. So if a property is composed of two or more words, combine the words, and then the first word should be in small letters, and any other word that follows should start with capital letter. So that's how we do that. So here we can change it into, we change the background color of the body tag into pink. So if I refresh and now we click, we get pink. So in our case, I just set it to pink for all cases. Now we just want to make that dynamic by picking the exact value the user actually sent us through the event element here. So in this case, if we reload and we click on red, we get red. Click on blue, we get blue. Green, we reset, it goes back to white. So basically, that's how you deal with such situations. So by learning how to manipulate the DOM element, you can add a lot of interactivities and dynamics on your web applications. And I hope you've learned something interesting in this lesson. And if you did, show me that you actually loved this lesson by liking this video, sharing it with other people, share it to many people as possible, and also do not hesitate to subscribe to our channel to show us your deep love, and we appreciate your presence in this community. See you in the next lesson.